Amaldo Perez, come on down. I will relay those questions then to our panel here for the conversation about worship planning here at the Institute generally, and here at the Institute specifically, and more generally, as that's applicable. If technology is a problem, if you and technology don't get along or you don't have a smartphone, I have a solution for that. It's the fellowship of the baptized. So look around, see some eager keener that's got their phone up already, and lean over and say, ask this question. All right, and they will do the typing for you, and we'll get your question. Does that work? All right. Does everybody, goodwill and mutual love, we'll get this. I've got, so we're already starting to see stuff post up out there. In order to get us started, what I'd like, first of all, for you five to do is just introduce yourselves briefly, the context in which you work, and how that context relates to your position on the group that planned worship here at the Institute. Yeah, get it close to you.
Hi, everybody.
Oh, we might need to turn it on.
Let's turn it on. I think, no,
there we go. That works.
There we go. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Amaldo Perez. I'm a musician. I've been music director for more years than I can care to mention here. But up until recently, up until August, I was in Perrysburg, Ohio, and, where I was director and cantor, director of music and cantor. And in August, I took a position in the suburbs of Chicago, working at Grace Lutheran Church in LaGrange. So I joined the council a couple of years ago, and it's been, I've been attending the Institute steadily since 2014, so I feel like I'm a newbie, and love every year coming here to this community. Thank you.
I'm Sally Messner. I am the Director of Music for the Institute. And back home in Dexter, Michigan, I work at a church in Livonia, which is just outside of Detroit, as the Director of Worship and Music at Holy Cross Lutheran. Previous to my role as Director of Music here, I have been the Schola conductor and also served on the Advisory Council last year.
Good afternoon. I'm Lieve Larson-Andrews, and I've been a pastor in Spokane, Washington for 13 years. That's the opposite side of the state from Seattle. We're 40 minutes from the Idaho border. And I have been on this wonderful council since 2018. And I think my role here is like arts and stuff. My own call to ministry came through by way of the arts, the theater arts, visual arts. I enjoy writing prayers and cultivating arts in worship, and then with other wonderful folk get to think about sacristy items and movement and the things we touch, that kind of thing.
Hello, I'm Ann Krantz Organ, and I serve as the Director of Music at St. Luke's Lutheran in Park Ridge, just outside of Chicago. This is my 8th year and final on the Advisory Council, so it's a kind of a 6-year term, but 2 years preceded as Schola Director.
Hello, I'm Craig Mueller, a lead pastor at Holy Trinity in Chicago. I've been on the council a couple years, but this is my first time with this team. But I will add, one of my favorite things in the world is liturgy planning and hymn choosing.
Okay.
We can attest to that.
All right, so can we start by just getting a sense of what worship planning looks like at the Institute and when you start doing that work?
Yeah, thank you. I got deputized to take the first stab at this. Jim used the phrase goodwill and genuine mutual love. And I think that's how we plan worship for the Institute of Liturgical Studies, by which I mean to say that we get a group of dedicated, faithful, gifted folk together in a room with a strong theme that same council has discerned, sometimes years in advance, sometimes less in advance. But we hold that theme prayerfully, textually, artfully together and sort of throw things on a table and paste them, cut them, change them. We gather in the before times, thinking about time, but in the before times, as we've said, there were a handful of in-person get-togethers. Sometime in June, we would hang out. Sometime in September, we come on campus here. We'll just name, there's a continual challenge for planning a thing in a space you're not in. So we all know the Chapel of the Resurrection. We think about it continually. Some of us were formed here very powerfully. But to sort of, ponder, well, what should evening prayer look like in the Chapel of the Resurrection? It's October in Spokane, but we're going to do this in April. You know what I mean? There's challenges like that. So we really do value in-person time here together. And then we, I think, lovingly take what we've done before and sort of put that in conversation with the theme and move through that. So a rhythm like opening Eucharist, closing Eucharist, Tuesdays, daily prayer pieces, something that's been kind of a rhythm we've fallen into or have kept. And then we just have the best time ever of debating hymns, and people like Craig say, well, what is the best hymn? And then we're like, what? So maybe I'll pause there and let my colleagues jump in and amend and add to what the planning process looks like. I mean, from there, we, codify what we're actually going to be about and make decisions about presiders and preachers and continually have an eye to both being anchored of where we've been, but all then, opening continually to freshen, enliven, be curious about where we're being called to take worship at the Institute. So.
Yeah, somewhere near the beginning of that process, a lectionary is formed, right, from the theme. And so a couple of folks on this team and the advisory council determine which readings we'll use for the various services. And so then we have that available to us as we're determining music and liturgical forms and all of that.
Thank you.
So I'll add to that. I mean, the process is very organic. We always start from the texts that are chosen for the theme and the arc, trying to create an arc. But the conversations are very collegial and very organic in terms of how to make the what I like to call the stronger choices, because we have all sorts of things that come to the table, right? And we discuss them in terms of how are we gonna, if we put this here, how that's gonna affect the sending Eucharist. If we use this hymn here on Tuesday, are we missing something on either of the two ends? Or so anyway, so the time was very, the theme of time, right? I mean, the liturgy of the hours is very evocative because we already have time marked by those liturgies, right? But we were concerned with how to mark time in that pattern, and then build our hymns around that gave cohesion and also identity to each one of those celebrations that we had together. So we had, I hope we have the pictures. I think we were, yeah. So of all the hymns that didn't make the cut, because we felt that there were stronger choices to be made. And if you know me, some of you do, my wife is an actress. So we always talk about, I was thinking about what our main speaker, James Smith, talked about. So the archaeology, right? Where are we going? Where are we coming from? And where are we going? Where are we trying to land? And we have all these choices available to us, right? Too many sometimes to count, but then we argue, and then, no argue, in the collegial way, right? We have deep conversations about what the strongest choice for the particular moment is. And it's fantastic to see the emerging, coming together around those hymns and those choices. So, thank you.
Super, thanks. So thank you very much for using this platform. Tell us about the process of planning and the tension between ideal versus practical, and ideal versus practical, quote, take home to your congregation aspects. So how do you negotiate that?
I will just say, we also always have to be holding in tension what everybody holds in tension in your own congregations about kind of serving as a laboratory here of being able to try things out that maybe you wouldn't try out this boldly in your home congregation, but balancing kind of the comfort with stretching and knowing that both are important.
So let's talk about last night for a second, because one of the reasons we are doing this is to reflect on what happened last night. And so you may want to ask some questions on that. We were thinking of the word mystagogy, where, at least in my understanding, in the early church, folks weren't told ahead what would happen at their baptism and so forth, their chrismation, and then they reflected on it afterwards. So what we want to do with you, and maybe you could ask questions, is what happened last night? What did it feel like last night? And then of course, you can ask us, what were you thinking? Of course, sitting up here now, I'm thinking, what were we thinking that we were going to sit up here to let you ask those questions? But I think last night's service is a great example of that question. I won't address it other than to say this is a place where we can be experimental and hold in tension what parts of it we might do in our own assemblies and what we wouldn't do. So I'll say that much and let someone add to that.
I will, from a practical point of view, I think you know your congregation, right? I mean, if you've been a reasonable time in your congregation, you will know what is, shall we say, within the bounds and what is stretching, pushing the envelope. So it really, it takes a kind of the job of discerning what those lines are and how you can address how what it's being done here can be of salutary gift to your congregation. So it's a very specific thing. So there's no prescriptive pattern to address, because every congregation I've served is its own thing. So being eclectic and trying to figure out what is the right move for your local situation.
Yeah, and I would say, at least for our services here, we've talked about and tried to provide a balance of things. Like tonight, for example, the Scola will be singing a 2-part setting of the Magnificat and a 2-part setting of the Nunc Dimittis. Very elegant and simple settings that I think many of us could take home to our congregations and use in services. The Valparaiso University Chorale will be singing Bach Cantata 106, which some of us could do in our context, maybe with hired professionals, but probably not something that we would do regularly in a worship service. You know, so there's, I think, for me, part of the experience here is having exposure to a variety of things like that.
I'll just add another kind of consideration. I don't know if it's on the spectrum of like bold and challenging or practical, but another thing we think about, I think, is actually a pastoral question of what is the assembly of the Institute of Liturgical Studies and what are the needs in this room? So what do we need in April of 2023 that might be unique or special? How can we move and create community together through worship? So that's another concern. And then when I was thinking about pieces I myself have taken home from the Institute, it's some of the commissioned work, which does pertain to our rhythms of worship. So when we have a hymn commission, we're just so joyful and delighted to feature that in worship well and lead it well and offer it. And then it can go out to congregations. And I'm just thinking about Caminemos con Jesus is one that's like gone into the rhythm of my congregation back home, and that came up from Institute. And it's just a joy. So.
And speaking of commissions, we're going to make the high-resolution digital images of Vonda's art available to everybody who's registered, and you have permission in the context of the Institute's commission to use it in your parish setting as you see fit, as long as you're not selling, as long as it's not the book cover on the, you know, the magnum opus that you're going to sell for $100 a copy. Anybody else want to speak to the ideal versus practical dynamic, or the here at the Institute versus back home question? All right. So here's a straightforward question. What resources do you turn to first when planning worship? What are your go-tos?
The Bible.
She said the Bible. Ding, 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 ding. Right.
I mean, the resources that we have in the chapel are really our main resources for song, right? I mean, we go from there. We had the good fortune of having the benefit of Melanie joining us this year, so we knew we could let go, gently and hand over the reins of leadership to Melanie. But that is, you need somebody, right, who is very experienced at doing that kind of thing, to lead it as smoothly as we witnessed last night. So that's something, that we can all aspire to. And I would be very careful to try that in my own congregation it just takes work and preparation. That's it.
Anybody else? Want to jump on that?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what that question was. Of course, ELW and LSB and, all the Lutheran resources and pretty much whatever resources are on the bookshelf in the planning room, which is quite a few, interdenominational sorts of song resources.
Yeah, let's not shortchange the years of experience and the places you've all been and the influences that you've had and the other people that you've talked to and to pull from here and there. And somebody knew Melanie to bring her with us. Yeah, Rhoda.
And last year we used that the size too deep because you wrote it. And you said, I'm working with this group and we're writing these things and you presented it to us and we all fell in love with it.
Mm-hmm. So sometimes original work shows up and everybody likes it. Yeah. Cool. What was left on the cutting room floor this time around that you recall? Do you have any? I've been looking for the photographs and I've got them somewhere on my phone. We had big pads of paper and we were just brainstorming hymn choices. There were probably 10 times as many hymns on those boards than the ones that we have time to sing.
Right. Well, every hymn that has anything to do with time ended up on that list. But yeah, we tried to be a little more subtle in our choices.
I think we didn't.
It's also always a trick to decide what setting of the liturgy will we use and what instrumentation will be used, and to try and kind of have a balance of that. So for the opening service with Melanie and having it be paperless, that was a choice, and that left a lot of things on the cutting floor. But then for the closing Eucharist on Wednesday, you're going to see the Hillert setting with, is it the VU band and organ? So there will be lots of different instrumentation, and it'll just be a very different feel from the Monday.
Tell us about the choice of how to serve communion post-COVID. Craig.
Communion in 10 kinds last night. Complicated, right? So I believe last year was only pouring chalice.
Correct, that's correct. Last year was only pouring chalice.
And there has been in some in fact, let's get people involved right now. Let's do a survey of the audience. In your congregations where you're worshiping, how many of you are using Common Cup at least in some way? So there has been a return to Common Cup. How many are only doing individual glasses in some form? Mm-hmm. Okay, how many are offering choices? Okay. And how many, if you want to admit it, are doing prepackaged still? Oh, they don't come to this conference.
That's a prejudicial statement, Craig.
Am I in trouble?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, we should say there's a lot of change. That among many places, what was done 2 or 3 years ago is sometimes being continued because no one has stopped doing that. Even at my grocery store, the Olive Bar is still the way it was in 2001, even though times have changed, and I don't like it because the tapenade isn't available anymore. So I think we made a decision that in this community, Common Cup would be important, and that we wanted to return it in some way, but a sense that maybe everybody wouldn't be for that. So then we offered pouring chalice also, and then a general sense from the means of grace statement of intinction being, well, I don't think I'm going to go there, other than some folks do feel that intinction isn't eating or drinking sometimes, and so by having both of those offered. But it's tricky, as you know, in your congregation with people's feelings. Who wants to help me out here?
That's it. Yeah, that's absolutely it. And we also need to make any of those given decisions sort of live at the chapel. So to be sure, chapel has pouring chalices and trays of glasses, and deep bow to Emily Smith, who's recently joined the advisory council, who can say, yes, there are glasses, and they will go to the dishwasher and then come back and be able to be used again. So thank you. Yeah.
All right. Worship here has a sense of holy playfulness.
Amen.
Any wisdom or experiences you can share about nurturing such a sense with congregations or hesitant colleagues?
I think playfulness and reverence sit side by side, like they're best buddies.
Yeah.
So I would hope, I hope we embody playfulness as either a route to reverence or part of reverence. I'll continue to meditate on how to bring that.
Yeah. If I may add, I think, one of the things that we talk about is like holding tradition, right, and uplifting the heritage that we carry with us. And in a way, I always thought of liturgy almost like good fitting clothes, right? It's not, good fitting clothes shouldn't be too tight, shouldn't be too loose. So what that means to you, I have no idea, but it's not something that makes you feel uncomfortable, right? So if the liturgy feels stuffy, there's a reason for that. If it feels too loose and I don't know, there are other words that we can add to that, then we need to revise why that feels that way. So I think, again, the timeliness issue, the kind of addressing the moment, and kind of the pedagogical in the sense of James Smith's book, right? That what is that we're trying to teach in what we do? What is being taught that is not expressly said?
Let's just name a few things. Easter Vigil readings, maybe laughing during homily, maybe a clapping piece, maybe a dancer, maybe working with our colleagues and worship leaders to encourage them to look like they're having fun would be a good place to start.
That reminds me also to give thanks for Dahlia Wilkes, who was our book bearer and dancer yesterday. Wow. So the invitation to Dahlia was to dance with the book during the gospel acclamation.
That was it.
You may have noticed she danced during the Gloria, the gospel acclamation, and
Sending you light.
Sending you light. I just saw her body kind of like itch. Dance, let the Spirit move you. And so that was a very holy, possibly playful, but I mean very reverent moment that she was deeply in worship, and I think drew us more deeply into worship.
Can you say more about the role of dance in worship? That's one of our questions.
Oh. Where's Dahlia?
You're right.
So I'll get us started.
There you go.
This is a story that I heard ages ago, and I can't even remember the original source of it, but it's a story about a famous dancer who danced, and then somebody came to her and said, "Can you tell us what that meant?" And her response was, "If I could tell you, I wouldn't have had to dance it." So I think one of the insights that we can gain from someone with the gifts that Dahlia has is that there are some experiences that we can have that are not put into words. And that too is part of what it means to be human and part of what it means to live under God and what it means to offer praise.
Yeah. That it strikes me that it's connected then to, for example, how Craig and I, guided the procession last night. That we might, in other times, guide folk into a more reverent, not even more reverent, but staid presence, I guess. Last night, I mean, especially as we are down in the chapel undercroft and we're hearing all of you singing, and we're like, we're stuck in the basement over here. This is not fun. But we were being inspired by all of your singing, and then many of us were starting to move, and it was like, oh, I think we can carry this, even if you are carrying a cross or a torch that needs to stay still so wax doesn't fly everywhere. But you might still be able to move your body and let your movement reflect the worship that's kind of being created as we're experiencing it. And we also do a lot about, if it's not thinking about dance, but we do think a lot about movement and where we're going to take the assembly.
Yes, I was going to add movement, thinking of body and movement in general, and the advice to presiders and all of us that a little yoga goes a long way, just to kind of relax and be comfortable in our skin.
So here's a comment. Last night was fabulous. Could you say more about, another question was, when we started to reference last night, we sounded a little bit apologetic. Can you tell us about, or maybe tentative is the right word. Can you tell us about what you thought was going to happen versus what actually happened, and how you think about that now in hindsight?
So I was reflecting last night on, even just starting with, our time with Melanie, and then watching the procession come up out of Gloria Christi and down the side. And I'll tell you this, you wouldn't know it because you didn't have printed bulletins, but a couple of things happened out of order from how we planned them. But they happened as they were supposed to. And for my part, all of the musical pieces and liturgical pieces and everything about last night I felt wove together so beautifully. And that's not to pat ourselves on the back, but just the experience of all of us together. And that the assembly, all of you, seemed to be taking it all in and also participating. As far as what we thought would happen, I think there was some, not hesitancy, but uncertainty on our part, because we felt like this was such a different experience for this gathering. And so we wanted to be sure that all of us were prepared to know that something different was going to happen. And so we didn't want anyone to be surprised. At the same time, leaving space for being in the moment, and having some unknowns. So I guess that's maybe part of our apologetics at the beginning. Anyone?
Does anybody else want to speak to what was for them the most poignant or spirited moment in last night's worship for you personally? Go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, well, I'll just say, and maybe this applies to a lot of you as well, but I'm so used to being in charge, right? And you're in the moment, but you're always thinking about what's next. And is my page turned, and who is the choir going to be ready for this? And is the lector, what's taking the lector so long to, all of this just goes through your mind. But without a printed bulletin, it was so lovely to just be in the moment and experience this all together and not be worried about it. Just let it happen. I thought it was wonderful.
Did y'all see the bird that flew in just as they rounded the corner by the font as we were singing, "Come by here, my Lord"? Anybody else want to speak to what moved them last night?
I'm curious to see what seems to be
Oh, yeah.
what was found more moving.
So why don't you post up stuff that you found moving? We also have several votes for I would like to hear from Melanie. What were her reflections about the experience of worship?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And here she is.
Hi, kids. First of all, you see the smile on my face? We got a thing that when you really feel a great sense of joy, that you smile out the back of your face, which means that this end connects to this end all the way around your head. This is actually my first experience working with the Lutherans. I work generally with Baptist to Buddhist, or, African Abyssinians to Zoroastrians. It was my first time in the L's. And so because I work with so many different practices, it's really interesting to see the places where we all connect. And as I was being a part of this, first of all, thank you for joining in and singing. Some of you are like, what? But you did it anyway. And that's what I love. And thank you to Oma, that's what I call him, for connecting me with all of you. But to I could really feel the deep connection to spirit here. Because there are a lot of religions that are religious, but not that many that are spiritual. And I could feel that. I could feel that deep connection to spirit. And of course, Sally over here, and all those different people. Bad Mama Jamma. I love all of that. I love the choir, and I'm so glad to, please allow me to be an honorary Lutheran. Oh, I already am. Oh, good. I got the T-shirt. I love that. But that was just really beautiful, and to be able to, I was at a service today as well. Y'all are bad to the bone. That's a good thing. So thank you very much.
Where did you find last night's Eucharistic prayer? It was beautiful and beautifully led. Where is Martin in the room? There he is. There he is.
It's Martin's baby. But okay, more than that, All Creation Sings, setting 12, designed for evening use with wonderful metaphors like mother hen, stay with us, Lord, for his evening. Look it up, buy the book right back there. It's being held up. All Creation Sings, leaders. I think it's in the Pew edition, isn't it? Yes.
The chant piece, though, Martin composed. We had decided we were going to use Dan Schwant's Sanctus and Agnus Dei, the paperless versions, and so Martin had the Sanctus in mind particularly when he was thinking about what chant would be best to put with this, and so he wrote it himself.
Yay.
Still on last night, here's a comment and then a question. I have hearing loss and depend on printed materials to aid my worship. I felt somewhat lost last night. Do you consider these concerns? Anybody want to say anything out loud about that?
We will take that to our next year's institute because we were thinking the things that we wanted to free us from, which is the fixation on the printed page, right? The attention being on a piece of paper, right? It can be freeing, but I could see why a person with an impediment in hearing would find that deleterious, right?
I suppose the solution is to make the leader edition available.
Okay. Yeah.
Another thing is just the whole sound issue in the chapel is challenging. And I noticed when we were in the quadrant, the 4 different seating sections, sometimes if I couldn't see Melanie's mouth, I wasn't sure what the words were until I heard them being sung back to me. So it's just a challenge.
Yeah, I'll say technically, the service so the chapel's got zoned audio, and I asked the sound technician to change the zoning about 2/3 of the way into Melanie's pre-stuff, because we were getting signals from the very east end of the chapel, and that's just really not helpful. So about 2/3 of the way through Melanie's introduction, the zoning changed to just the speakers immediately around the community, and I think things improved from that point, though I think your point's well taken, and especially too in low light conditions like we have. We don't realize how many other cues we depend upon for communication. And when one of those senses is taken from us, it just really shuts down lots of others. So it's something to think about as you think about paperless at home.
Mayor, because with sight impaired, I can't do the technology
Uh-huh.
that we've got going on here. I appreciate it as I'm losing my sight. The ability not to be yoked and to hear and then respond.
Yeah.
I leave that with you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Betty. So it's the whole body. Did Martin transcribe his chant? No. That answers the second half of the question. Might that be made available to participants? Take it up with him at the Bell and Beacon tonight over a beer. So there's a book called Singing in Community that has the Sanctus and other parts that were used last night. Dan, this is Dan Schwant's work. Yes? Lee, you want to add something?
I've just been meditating on this question about, do you think about people with varying abilities? And the answer there is yes. And I can also hear Susan Briel in my head say there are gains and losses with every choice. But we hold those choices as very sacred. And so, we think about movement lines a lot and try to think about the width of wheelchairs and things like that, or other movement aids. So I'm very grateful for that question, just to say we're continually trying to grow and mature and deepen our conversations on that. I would love any wisdom that you have.
I'm sort of bouncing back between questions that got lots of votes and some that didn't get very many, but seem to be worth asking, or at least by my arrogant judgment. How do you navigate the thinking about the ecumenical context of participants in relationship with liturgy planning, resourcing, both Lutheran and non?
I would start by saying, just by nature of having both the ELW and the LSB accessible to us to use as participants in the chapel.
And just to prevent any insider baseball, that's Evangelical Lutheran Worship, which is the hymnal at the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, and Lutheran Service Book, which is the hymnal from the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
Yes. And also, as we strive to be an ecumenical institute, holding in balance the use of those resources, in conjunction with others also, but if we're thinking about the hymn book that we might pick up to sing out of, right, it would be one of those too. And so, like last night, we sang out of the Red Worship Book, ELW, and then tonight our evening prayer service will be out of Lutheran Service Book. But then we also, as Anne mentioned, in the planning room that we use, there are a myriad of resources from other denominations as well that we use.
Have you noticed in political debates that a question is asked and then the responder talks about whatever they want instead of the right answer? So what I'd like to bring up is a different question. That we are called an ecumenical conference. And I think it's important that we start thinking, what does that mean? Our presenters are often ecumenical, our leaders, but not the participants so much. And there's a limit to how much ecumenical material we use. But I think we need to think, how could we broaden because we share the same lectionary, the same church year, this could be such a larger event of other denominations, Methodists, Presbyterians, Episcopalians, that truly could be an ecumenical conference, but we all need to work on that and see what that might mean.
So here's a couple of rhetorical questions. The first is, the procession was transporting, time stood still. Why is Dan Schwant so talented? Please explain. I just read them, people. And then this one, will contemporary / praise and worship music find its way into ILS worship services in any significant way?
In my few years that I've been here, I don't think that has been the what do you call it, the mode of expression that we've embraced. So I do think that this service this morning, led with non-traditional instruments, was a wonderful example of how to lead a morning prayer service with guitar and well, the Shruti box was, and the melodica. So I thought that was lovely. So those are right in the mix, right? In this space, I do think that there's it would be very difficult to pull off the electric ensemble, shall we call it, right? And I think architecturally we are limited. So how the porcupines mate, I don't know. So.
Anybody else after that one? How can the organ and all music be participatory rather than just performative? As organists become ever more rare, how do we steward the organs in churches? That's two questions. So let's ask the first one. How can the organ and all music be participatory rather than performative?
I'm going to jump in on that again. Everything that we do in church can flip from one to the other and then back again. So what it calls for is very careful discernment, okay? So I've seen well-intentioned people take prayers to a place you don't want to take prayers to, right? Because they feel, I want to preach, watch me say these wonderful words, right? So that happens in music, happens in every so it's the intention and we have to kind of be vessels and watch out for the performative bug, especially if you come from a conservatory, right? And you have that kind of like the showy thing that they put in you in those schools. So anyway, that's a different subject. I'm sorry.
No, it's similar. And I think it largely depends on the person sitting on the bench, right? And how they're using the instrument to cover the assembly singing or love the people into song, right? Yeah. And draw it out of them.
Anybody want to speak to the stewarding? Are we stewarding organs or organists? This question is, as organists become ever more rare, how do we steward the organs in churches? Anybody have opinions about how to respond to that?
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm monopolizing that. So the whole idea that, from the, Jim, where are you? So the association, Jim, we're in the lob. So the Association of Lutheran Church Musicians, right? Our motto is to keep going, nurture musicians to continue the church's song, right? So to enable people to be loved into song and to share that gift of the song that the church carries with it into time, right? So I tend not to fixate into organ or piano or guitar or anything, because I think what we've preached forever at the association is that the congregational voice that we want to strengthen, right? And again, last night, we could have spent the whole night singing, and I could have done without anything else, right? With everything else. So think about that. I don't think it's one or the other, right? So these are just means to an end, which is the singing, the healthy singing in the life of the church, right?
Questions about the seating plan. Why did we order ourselves in that way physically? Would it not have? Did we consider a more conventional seating plan?
I call on you to answer that.
Okay, so that's my space. It's the place where I work with my colleague Kathleen Musaeus. And one of the reasons that we put chairs in there when we needed to replace the pews several years ago was to offer us the opportunity for some flexibility. We went whole hog into that in the early days, even before we had chairs, and in an effort to create a level of community, pretty much abandoned the east end of the chapel for a while, with the exception of really big services like homecoming and Easter. And the learning that, and this is now speaking of chapel practice, university practice, not the Institute. The learning that we discovered during that time was that by doing that, our students who were helping us lead worship didn't know how to lead worship around the high altar, and such that Easter Sunday was like a performative challenge because they had very limited experience with that. And we, very early on when we first initiated the gathered seating and we commissioned that small sub-altar that you see there with the icons around it, my colleague, Dr. Christopher Gruntman, came up to me and said, "I really like looking at those stained glass windows and you're taking them away from me." I brushed him off with some nodding, smiling comment, but I think he was actually right. One of the things that COVID taught us was when they let us back into the building, there was a half a semester where we weren't even on campus. And then the following fall, we were allowed back into the building, but the campus engineer told us that because there was no mechanical air circulation, we couldn't sing. And in my bones, I said, "But we're Lutheran Christians. How can we do that? How can we not sing?" So there was a season there where we were allowed 4 singers, and then Dr. Kim lobbied for 8 singers because she was having experiences where, you know, like one Sunday the alto would have COVID, and so then she wouldn't have all 4 parts. So we went through that. But the deal that we struck with the university administration was we will orient the space eastward and we will space the chairs rows all 6 feet apart in order to create the social distancing that was required for that. And in doing so, I'll tell you, we rediscovered the east end of that chapel. And so that has now become, again, the default location for most worship, unless it's in Gloria Christi, the small chapel downstairs. When we were thinking about this institute, we were talking about creating multiple experiences, and we knew that Monday night and Wednesday night were going to be really different experiences, sort of genre-wise and liturgically. And so we decided to create 2 different spaces, at least I think, that's my memory anyway. And so what you see on the west end, this diamond shape, is the gathered seating plan that we used in the Chapel of the Resurrection before COVID, with the table in the middle. The U that you'll experience tonight is nobody's ever done before, to my knowledge, in the chapel. So we're trying that out. Talk to us about it tomorrow. I'm convinced, to pick up on Craig's mystagogy comment earlier, that the best way for adults to learn things is to throw them into an experience and then invite them to talk about it afterwards. So that's what we're doing right now. So that's what the thinking was around the non-conventional seating arrangement. The other thing that we're negotiating as an institute is the fact that, as fabulous as the chapel is, and believe me, I've been here 20 years, it's one of my favorite buildings on the whole planet. The chancel is inaccessible, right? So what you're going to see tomorrow night is one way of celebrating the Eucharist at an altar space that is not accessible to all people. And I'll just leave it at that, and you can decide and tell us in the comments how close to good we got. Anybody else want to speak to leave?
Just adding to what Jim already shared, and I'll back him up on what we were thinking. But that Monday would be this in-gathering in my mind, I don't know if I shared it with the team, but I kind of thought like, if you could put a campfire in the middle of the chapel and like gather people around it, that was the sense I was working with in my head about we're breathing together, we're clapping, we're finding our rhythm, we're going to be moved, we're going to sing. So that diamond circle, your gathering space, and then Wednesday being our sending Eucharist. So the sort of most of us, save the you, will be looking the same way. There's a sense that we're sent back out into the world, so I think that's also part of the logic there.
Thanks again for all of the questions. We're going to have more here than we're going to have time to answer, but this is all super helpful. And know that the questions that you're asking and the implications behind them, we will be using in review. How do you come up with a theme for the Institute? Does anybody want to talk to us about this, finding your rhythm in the
Well, for years, we were doing kind of like a 3-year pattern. And then COVID hit, and it just felt like, man, can we even do a 1-year pattern? So, yeah, that's all I'll say.
So what I think the fullness of time was a theme that was in the air for a couple of years, right? And the idea of embodiment, and then the book conversation came up, Jamie Smith's book, and all these things coalesce beautifully in conversation. And well, it just, I guess we talk about things and bounce the ball around until we land on something that sounds really exciting. And I think we let our enthusiasm guide the process. I think it's very noticeable in the room when we have arrived at a consensus.
And we do that as a whole council, right? Yeah. So I think we are, all of us, oh, go ahead, Rhoda.
Yeah, I think I would also say that trying to do that over Zoom did not work well. Mm-hmm. But when we met in person, and Jim, don't we have a long list of potential?
Yes, there's a long list of potential that been brainstormed over time that get sort of edited through.
I mean, yeah. Speaking of the cutting floor, like there's a whole lot of themes.
Right.
We're like, nope. But I think all of us are just kind of listening, trying to pay attention to conversations in our various circles, and like when there's conversations that seem to hit a lot of different worlds or conversations that we have shared, that pretty organically bubbles up. And Rhoda is right that there's a synergy in the room that's just so much harder on the bright boxes of Zoom.
I'll tell you right now, the working title for next year, and I'm also going to tell you this right now, which will start a day later because of the eclipse. More about that later.
Okay, wait. On the cutting floor, though, was my thought that we need to do the eclipse and just all get together and kind of go Burning Man about it. But you can't, like, it's just too expensive. That's the thing. Sorry.
So the working title for next year, speaking of themes, is creativity. This may change, right? This is a working title, right? Creativity, not commodity, curating the church's liturgy in a consumer culture. That's what we're thinking about for next year. All right. Last night's homily was wonderful. Yes, Mandy is one of my favorite people. Is this being recorded? No. Melanie described her as a badass. There we go. What are you excited to try next in your own context or next year at the Institute?
Haven't gotten that far, so.
All right, so let me ask this question, and this will be our final. So many good things get debuted at the Institute of Liturgical Studies. What are the main sources you go to discover new or new to you songs, texts, and practices?
We ask around.
Yeah.
We ask each other, yeah. So, the good fortune of working with wonderful people is that everybody has friends, and friends of friends, and people know people. So we rely on our friends to help us.
Well, and to echo Rhoda's affirmation of Anne's composition, there's quite a bit of things that get created by the team. either texts or compositions or, movement or artwork. So we're one another's resources there.
Yeah, I think that there's something to be said for having a network. Somebody once said, "You're only as strong as your connections," right? And I've discovered in my life one of my favorite things to be able to say is, "I know someone who can do that." So let me remind you that the network isn't exclusive to this panel here. This is not just about the folk that they know and how smart and creative they are and their creative and smart friends. You're part of this network, right? And you know how to get a hold of all of us. So feel free to exercise that connection.
Please do, please.
What's the biggest lesson? Okay, we got time for one more. What's the biggest lesson you've learned from your time on this planning committee, either from this year's plan or years past? And that will be our final question, with thanks to everybody here. Rehearse.
Yes.
Make time for rehearsal.
Can you say more about that?
Oh yeah, last year's institute, I found myself with very little time to rehearse a few things, and I felt really bad about it. So I won't say no anymore, but always make time for rehearsal. Rehearse everything, yes.
Yeah, I mean, we have a worship leader rehearsal for each of our liturgies. So this morning at 8 a.m., those who were leading morning prayer met with each other and with Lieve and Craig, who are helping with movement and, where are we sitting. That was morning prayer. And then right after morning prayer at 9 a.m., we had the worship leader rehearsal for midday prayer. And so, yes, rehearsal is a good thing.
And can I just observe that rehearsal is about freeing people, not binding them?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you say something about that from a musician's perspective?
Yeah, well, yes. Moving through the motions, so even in a sense where I'm not rehearsing the music, but I am walking through, picturing myself, not just picturing, but actually doing it, the physical thing, it starts to form a muscle memory. And so just that then opens up, knowing what to expect exactly, for me, opens up room for more artistic expression.
Mm-hmm. And I will add to that, the amount of things that can go wrong, you don't know what you don't know. And if it's going to go wrong, it's going to happen where you don't expect it, right? So we had all the equipment earlier, and we were rehearsing, but the wrong wire was in the case. Lost 10 minutes looking for a wire, connected the wire. There's a back contact between an instrument and the little amplifier. We got to go again back. So you don't want to discover that the day of. So, yeah.
The rehearsal could lead us to be in the moment and perhaps be playful.
Yeah. Thank you, Craig. I'll say anxiety rises when there's uncertainty, and especially like uncertainty of expectations. So for me, that rehearsing, just walking through it of like, if you're a torchbearer, here's where you're going to end up, here's where you start, and just knowing those few things then allows that person to be present for worship. And I think something I learned about this amazing institute is also the presence of spontaneity within that, the freedom that comes from rehearsing and making a plan.
I think it's also really important to trust the assembly. We're all doing this together, and that's a big learning I've had, especially post-COVID. I am so much more open to seeing how things go and not trying to control everything. That, for me, was a big takeaway.
Mm-hmm.
Rehearsing not just musicians, but all the people in the procession, and not just saying, here's where you're going to start, here's where you're going to end, but we're going to walk through the whole thing. Because again, it's the muscle memory, and because we're just embodied, we do it, we will remember it much better than if we just hear it.
So we walk through the whole thing, and I have not been present for rehearsals, but are we walking through with our hardware, with our stuff? Yeah. Pacing and all of that stuff. So it's not just let's walk the place where you're going to carry the cross. We're going to walk the cross from here to there. Yeah. Okay. Hey, Craig, Anne, Lieve, Sally, Amaldo, thank you very much. Thanks to you all for your questions. 15-minute break. Workshop sessions start at 3:45. Come up here if you don't know, and I'll be posting detailed descriptions of the workshops up on the chat. If you're not on the chat and you wish you were, Doreen and Susan have the QR code on a piece of paper out in the hallway. And if you're having trouble with WhatsApp, turn off your Wi-Fi.